Okay, welcome everybody, and good morning or good evening, as the case may be. You already have some background about where this is coming from, but obviously my talk is about the basic meanings of long, flat, and round. You can see the outline of the talk here. I wanted to draw your attention also to the acknowledgement section. And these people who have all contributed helpfully in discussions that we've been having ongoingly about these explications. Essentially, long, flat, and round have been posited as important semantic molecules in NSM theory for more than 15 years. There's a bunch of references there. What I'm doing in this talk is reporting on this overhaul of published explications that's being carried forward primarily by myself and Anna Wyzybicka as part of the BBROM project, but also with the kind of collaboration and interaction of a lot of other people. Initially, this revision process was impelled by the need to eliminate non-allowable uses of the semantic prime have parts. So previous versions of these explications leaned heavily on phrases involving parts, which we no longer believe are a legitimate part of NSM. So that was one reason why the explications had to be revisited. But there were a lot of other changes that we made along the way as we inspected each explication and sort of went back to basics, so to speak. The revised explications that I'm going to present in this paper are actually more simple and more versatile than all previous versions. It's still work in progress. Essentially, the strategy that Anna and I have been employing is to try to create explications that are as broadly applicable as possible. But even so, I have to say that with really basic words like these, long, round, and flat, there are a lot of kind of extended meanings, and also there is polysemy. But I'll just mention one principle of meaning extension here, and you'll see how it works later. Once you have your basic meaning long, I'm going to use this extension 0, long 0, flat 0, round 0 to designate kind of basic molecular meaning of those words. Once you've got those words in place, you can use a component in other explications to this effect. People can think about it like this: it is like something long, or it is like something flat, or it is like something round. And yeah, that's a way of getting a kind of meaning extension. It's not the same as classical lexical polysemy. And you'll see how it works as we go through the rest of the talk. Warning, explicating basic molecules like long, flat, and round is difficult, in fact, very difficult. And basically, I think the reason for this is that they are just so basic semantically and cognitively. We have been thinking in terms of these concepts, from pre-infancy. They are also laminated into the meanings of innumerable everyday words. And it's very difficult to sort of go back and kind of undo or unpack a kind of configuration of meanings which has been active in our minds, for a very long time. I also want to note at the beginning, because this just may help the general interest of the talk, that meanings of like long, round, and flat are relevant to lots of other topics in linguistics and cognitive semantics, including questions of embodiment, issues about the semantics of classifiers in languages like Chinese or Thai, and even to the fundamentals of ethnogeometry. But all that stuff will have to wait for the discussion section. So before getting going with long 0, these are the kind of words that one imagines, or we believe, that require long as a molecule in their meanings. People's arms and legs, things like sticks and spears. The meaning of those words, as we understand it, would necessarily involve saying something like that they are long. Now, I just got to mention here that this long 0, the semantic molecule long, it's very important not to get that mixed up with another use of long in English, which can be called the relative use of long. And this relative use of long, in this relative use of long, long contrasts with short. And Anna has written very persuasively about this in her 2006 article. Basically, the semantic molecule long, we regard it as as a necessary building block of concepts like people's arms and people's legs. So it's part of the meaning of arms and legs that people can think of them as long. But of course, obviously, nothing stops anybody from saying about a particular individual that person has long arms, meaning more or less longer than one would expect, or for that matter, short arms, not as long as one would expect. But those meanings of long, these relative meanings of long, or dimensional meanings of long, are not what we're interested in here. Here, I'm just focusing on this semantic molecule long. All of the explications, these three explications, long, round, and flat, all use a sort of common structure, which we call a semantic template. Let's just have a look at how it works for long. So here's the idea. If you would say about something, it's long, this would be the meaning. When people look at this thing for some time, they can think about it like this. There are many places here, or maybe there. Two of these places are on two sides of this thing. One is on one side, one is on the other side. So there's a sort of visual pathing of the object in terms of positions or places, and awareness of two places laterally, so to speak, on two sides. At the same time, that's at the same time that people are looking at this thing for some time, they can think like this. These two places are not like all the others because one of them is very far from the other. All of the elements in this explication are semantic primes, with the possible exception of the expression look at, which, as many of you all know, is a somewhat English-specific word. In many languages, see and look at are not distinguished, so to speak. But in English, if you use English NSM and you're talking about seeing something for some time, it really sounds so much better to use look at rather than see. So this can be a discussion point for later. Is this just a kind of a portmanteau, an English portmanteau, or is there something else in it? Now, this explication is quite similar to the legacy explications that were previously published, but it doesn't use parts at all. It construes the whole thing in terms of a way of seeing something in terms of places. If you wanted to use this kind of explication to talk about, for instance, something like a river, as in Helen Bromhead's work, you basically wanted to say that a river is a kind of place of one kind, and you wanted that extended, elongated meaning to come through, then you'd have to use this meaning extension component in the explication of river. So you could say that people can think about such a place as it is like something long. I'll come back to this later, but aside from switching from reliance on parts to places, the other big difference between this explication and some previous ones is that there's nothing in it about touching with the hands. Previous explications sort of lent on the idea that long, round, and flat had to do with something like shape, and there was a component about touching with the hands, but that's no longer present in these explications. Okay, what about flat? So for instance, something like a tabletop or a plate, perhaps, would be a good context for talking about something that's flat. You could also use this meaning talking about the ground in a place, saying that it's flat. So here's the idea: when people look at this thing for some time, they can think about it like this. There are many places here, same as for long, but the sort of secondary impression is that many of these places are far from many others. So more or less the idea is that when you see something and it's open to you to think about it being flat, there's an impression of it being more or less spread out. that it's sort of wide. Many of the places are far from many others. So after that sort of first look, or so to speak, at the same time as you're looking at this thing for some time, you can think, it's not like this. Some of these places are not like all the others because they are above some others. It's interesting, you know, it's the impression that something is flat, according to this explication, is that there's no places or there's no areas which are raised above the others. If you would wonder about something like a wall or a window, it's very easy to talk about walls or windows as being flat. Actually, this explication wouldn't quite fit, because the construal that there's no kind of raised up places implies that it's more suitable for horizontal object, you know, because it's got above in it. But even so, you could easily use the flat zero in an explication, or for something like a wall or a window, using this extended meaning. People can think about it like this: it is like something flat. At least that's our proposal. Actually, traditional lexicography makes a lot of use of this kind of by extension kind of commentary in dictionary definitions. And we're now seeing this as a sort of NSM analog of that sort of principle of cognitive extension. In a short talk, I've just got to move on quickly, right? So now I want to show you the explication for, proposed explication for round, which you could use about something like the sun, or a wheel, or a coin. And it's definitely the trickiest one of the three in our experience. Notice that these things include, so to speak, two-dimensional image like the sun, or three-dimensional object like a wheel or a coin. We've tried to craft the explication in such a way that it'll be appropriate for either sort of situation. So here we go. Just saying about something, it's round. When people look at this thing for some time, they can think about it like this. There are many places here, or maybe there might sound better in some languages. There are many places here. Some of these places are not inside this thing. They are on all sides of this thing. So the idea is, if you would see, say, the sun in the sky, your attention is not caught by the idea that there are sort of interior places, but your interest is in the places on all sides of this thing. If it was an orange or an apple or a wheel, likewise, your interest is on the places on all sides of this thing. So having kind of focused your attention in that way, at the same time, these people who are looking at the thing for some time can think like this. It's not like this. Some of these places are not like all the others. It is like this. If someone looks at all these places, they can see the same everywhere. So your visual impression is that all the surrounding places, which would be on the outside, so to speak, when you look at them all, you can see the same everywhere. Could be that we may need to build a bit more of a kind of sequentiality into this component, with the idea of looking around, so to speak, or turning something around in your hands. That's very open to discussion. We know that in some languages, for instance, in Malay, you can't just use a semantic prime for sides and all in this way. You need to use a portmanteau word, which kind of is roughly equivalent to all around. And there could be some other different language specific issues in the realization of this, of the meta language here. You probably noticed at the bottom here, I don't think this explication would really work for a ring, you know, the kind of ring you put on your finger, because the idea of being aware of places that are not inside perhaps doesn't sit too well with a ring, or for a hoop for that matter, like a hula hoop. On the other hand, for that kind of item, we could use this meaning extension in the explication for ring or for hoop, that people can think about it like this. It is like something round. I have there's many discussable points, and I hope we will discuss them. I just want to indicate now somewhat what I think of as pending questions. That is, things that we're aware of and which I haven't been able to talk about in this presentation, partly because we haven't thought them through fully, but also for reasons of time. It's possible that these components can be combined. So for instance, suppose you were talking about a plate. You might want to say, well, people can think about it like this. It is like something flat. At the same time, they can think about it like this. It is like something round. Why not? We may need, in fact, we will need to use this kind of mechanism of, the interesting question is exactly what are the mechanisms available for combining this kind of components. The second thing, which is very pertinent to the BBOM project, but also to the NSM project generally, is the question of how much universality or commonality is needed or expected in very basic concepts like these. It's not necessary in terms of NSM theory to believe that even molecules like these are exactly the same in every single language. Maybe there is room for some variation. And in fact, Anna, back in her 2006 paper, argued that the nearest Polish equivalent of long isn't an exact match to English long, because English long, if you remember, the idea is that you had two places on two sides and they were very far from one another, or people could think of them as very far from one another. But in Polish, it seems, the construal is that they are far from one another, not very far. So from an intuitive or impressionistic point of view, the English long is kind of longer or more extended, more elongated than the Polish long. And Anna Brotherson, who did an article back in 2006 on Masakai, a language of Timor, she proposed a similar, or made similar observations about the Masakai nearest equivalent of long. So it's certainly possible that some variations like this occur cross-linguistically, and it will be very interesting to try to scope out how extensive they are and what are the consequences for other explications in which these words are molecular elements. Looking a bit wider, for people who have been following the history of cognitive linguistics, I would just like to say that I can see at a very broad level that these explications are now a bit more close in spirit to the sort of explications or the sort of cognitive semantics of Ron Lanneker, for instance, than the previous explications were, in that there's more emphasis on vision in these explications, and there's more emphasis on what in cognitive linguistics people would call space, which comes through in NSM in relation to places. I think that's kind of interesting external perspective. But importantly, the NSM explications are still essentially about ways of thinking. It's not like there's objective realities here. It's how people can think about things based on how they see them. And the final point, which may not be of interest or even make sense to lots of people, I think if we go back to the explication of round, you would see that there's something in that explication which we could understand as something like the concept of an enclosed space. The idea that there can be places inside some kind of area. I just wonder, and we have the sun in the sky and the moon, of course, which are constantly available to us as a kind of image. Maybe this kind of idea of round is a sort of cognitive trigger, or at least can be a kind of cognitive trigger for thinking about other possible enclosed spaces. And it seems to me that if you start thinking that way, another sort of simple kind of enclosed space would use three lines. So not the same on all sides, but three lines. And that would be what we in English call a triangle. Maybe this is what got the ancient Greeks started. because once you've got the idea of a circle, actually round is not the same as circle, but it's closely related, but you've got the idea of circle, you've got the idea of triangle, then you can start thinking about what happens if there's a triangle inside a circle. And basically, if you start thinking in that way, you're possibly on the way to Euclidean geometry. Again, this is just pure speculation and a pure interest point for me, and for others who may find that kind of thing interesting. Here are a bunch of references. When you review the talk later, you can freeze frame and follow up those if you wish. And that's the end of my presentation. And at this point, I'd like to invite questions, comments, and suggestions.